Hello, and welcome back to another Pickled Dragon Unscripted. We have a great show for you today. And when I say we have the amazing Dracoy over there drinking a wonderful beverage. What are you drinking today?
I am drinking a lovely white wine from Portugal. It's nice, it's light, it's refreshing. It's kind of like it has notes of Granny Smith apple in it. So it's a little
Granny.
bit tart, but it's not too sweet, which I don't like things that are too sweet. So yeah.
And I am drinking some Alexander Murray and Company single malt Scotch whiskey. I know it's not like I know it's not like Glenlivet or Glenmorangie, but it's quintessentially Scottish, it says. So we'll go with that. Um, so yeah, we are we have a great video for you today. So I was reading a gaming magazine and we found this really amazing, this incredible new game. Um, and it's called Dungeons and Dragons. It's amazing. So so I found this magazine. Well, actually, a viewer tipped me off to this magazine, Campaign Magazine. So this in the 60s and 70s was a magazine that was devoted to war gamers and reviewing war games and talking about strategy and whatnot. But in 1977, the writers of the magazine reviewed a new game, a new amazing, wonderful game called Dungeons and Dragons. And at the time, they were trying to convince war gamers that they need to try this game too. And obviously we've talked about how Gary Gygax and the crew, they had their origins in wargaming. But role playing games were a totally new thing, you know?
Yeah, and I actually really like how in the very beginning of the article they talk about the setting, which is a medieval fantasy adjacent setting, and they derived inspiration from Conan the Barbarian and Lord of the Rings.
And the other thing I really liked about the intro, and this was a very long article, so we're not going to go through the whole thing. We're just going to
Oh
give
yeah,
you a couple of highlights.
the
Uh,
synopsis, the important parts.
yeah, so I'm going to show you what's going down here. Um, so the article, if you take a look here, I think it's really cool. So it starts off introducing Dungeons and Dragons. To yourself Dungeons and Dragons. They're
What
trying.
exactly is D&D?
Yes, and this is like I always think about like my absolute favorite moments in D&D all kind of revolve around my earliest experiences in D&D. Like the first time we fought a troll and we could not figure out why it kept getting up and killing us, like all these weird things that we had no idea about because we had never experienced anything before like it, right? We had no.
Back when it was new.
So in this case, they are trying, and it's funny because they actually make reference to this in this article where they're like, we know you're a bunch of antisocial nerds who don't want any part of having to talk to people, but really this is super cool and you need to try it, right?
Yeah,
Uh,
pretty much.
but one of the things that they mentioned here is that the the rules, unlike the war games, the rules are only a very loose system of play, and that the DM is responsible for filling in all the gaps. So even in 1977, they were expected, and it was known that they were expected to create rules, and here they even say embellishes the rules system to fit its own universe. So the DM was supposed to create rule systems that were designed to make their little homebrew world flow more smoothly and come to life. Um, so it's a very very cool article
Well,
from that standpoint.
actually, I'm going to interrupt you. And one of the things that I really like, and I'm glad that you zoomed into the first page because they go into this on the second page, and I made a lot of notes. On a deeper level, D&D may provide a path of insight into one's own thoughts and his relationship to the others. And it's very true. If you guys have ever played with a group of your friends for a long period of time, you can really get to know them through their D&D characters. For me personally, I had a really interesting experience where when I first played D&D, I played with a bunch of strangers. I had no idea who they were or what they were like or what their values were. So I got to know them via their D&D characters. And it was really fun. It was really interesting. Not only learning, giving me insight into who they are, but really giving me insight into who I am. Like I would do things and I'm like, oh, that's the kind of person I am. Hmm.
Yeah, and this section that you bring up, Dracoya, is is very, I think it's a very significant statement that they're making here. So, continue where she left off, the nature of the system decrees that the more seriously one engages the inner self, the more satisfaction he gets from the game.
Hmm.
Many war gamers, because again, at this time, they're trying to convert war gamers who are the predominant group of gamers at the time. The many war gamers have reservations about D&D, feeling that it is a game for kids. Admittedly, the game can, let me go to the next page. We're going to go up here, be confined to this superficial level by immature individuals looking for an opportunity to vent their impulsive wishes, offing monsters and scooping up goodies. However, for those individuals looking for something more, a good game of D&D is well worth the effort. So I have a story here, and this goes to what you say, Jacoya. My dear friend Jason, he's long passed from cancer, but we most role playing games, like they say there are a player can play how they wish. They could be that immature individual looking to off monsters and whatnot. And sorry, I'm just thinking about Jason. Um, the people could be immature and whatnot. Jason always took the game very seriously, and he was one of those people that really through gaming you caught a glimpse of that inner self of who he genuinely was, that you never like if I worked with him at the bookstore, the opportunity to know him on this level never presented itself. But when we first started gaming together and I sat down, I go, well, what do you want to do with your character? I want to be a pacifist.
Okay.
And in a game where there's like literally you're not harming anyone, literally you can go rampaging through villages and destroying and he wanted to be a pacifist. And that's just who he was. Like the idea of even harming make believe creatures was abhorrent to him. And I'll always remember that. That was like through gaming, I was able to see a side of him that we didn't necessarily would have never had the opportunity, because in everyday life, how often does something like that even come up? And he was a genuinely good person. So, I when I read that section, I immediately thought of him and was like, wow, this is really cool. And You know, we all have an opportunity to see, you know, deep down. I think gaming can reveal who we really are, in that regard.
I think gaming is a really wonderful use, and it's an underutilized use of how to explore oneself and how to explore teamwork and um, maybe some of our teammates. It's really underutilized, and this is probably a whole other video that Matt and I are gonna talk to you about. But Matt, you had talked about how, and this is a game when you can go to villages and just, slaughter everyone without feeling like there's any consequences. I really liked this article because it brought that up specifically about, so this is the different section where it says dungeon tips for dungeon masters. And in one of the tips that they gave, it's like there needs to be consequences for your players. So they talked about an instance where they had a group of people that were like, "Oh, well, I'm just gonna go around looting the town. Who cares?" And sure enough, they eventually ran into a group of very brutal police that kicked their asses, took everything that they had, fined them a massive fine, and then from then on, any time that they needed to buy anything, it had a 10x market price.
Yeah, it's funny too because when you read through this, you see references to the same old arguments we have today. Like there's like, they literally had only a year's worth of experience playing D&D, and they had no internet, no magazines, no articles or anything to go off on, but they
Right.
dove into the game and they played a whole ton. And they were like, here are all the pitfalls that we came across for DMs, and one of them was, don't be that adversarial DM, you know, and don't pit players against players, don't be that DM, and it was very, very telling to me because I could see, because they mentioned, like, we had some bad DMs and so they ran the gambit. They played with a lot of different people, and they loved the game, And this is a group of people coming from a war game background where all the rules were very concrete. So this idea of a very loose rule set where there's a lot of homebrew rules used to build the world out is fascinating to me. And I wish I could have been a fly on the wall for those first experiences. Um, and just like we always talk about movies and stuff, like we think about, oh well, I had this great idea. I based it on Conan the Barbarian, Arnold Schwarzenegger, or I based it on this movie or that movie. We did some videos early on, when Jacoya and I first got together, and the movies that inspired us. Well, they, in the article, they're like, oh man, you could be just like a cleric, just like in The Exorcist, and like they had these movie inspirations and so forth. It was very cool that even like in the very first moments of D&D, the very first months of D&D, they were like, moved and inspired by the same mediums that we were, you know,
Yeah.
came later. It's I think it's so amazing. Um,
It's funny that you brought up the Exorcist part because as I was reading this article, all I could hear and during certain parts, I just heard my grandmother saying, "Don't play D&D. Have you heard of this new game that the kids are playing, Dungeons and Dragons? It apparently, gets them to open themselves up to the devil, and that's how the devil gets you." And yes, that's more or less how my grandmother spoke, guys.
yeah, and I've had those experiences too. As my
Rest in peace, Grandma.
Yes, I actually got it from my mom's boss when he noticed all my books in the back seat of her car. What?
No.
Yeah, you know, and they also had like play tips for players, which I
Yeah.
thought was cool. Like if you're like, and it's funny they talk about spell casting, like please be ready with your turn, and and again it was like all the same stuff that we talk about and gripe about now, like hogging the attention and whatnot. It's really cool.
The game has evolved so far and yet not at all.
At least the problems are still there. The problems are people problems, right?
You're right. The problems are people problems, not the game problems.
Yeah.
So it's funny how, Matt and I have been talking about how D&D is going to shit and screw it all, but yet a lot of the problems that they're talking about we still have.
Yeah. But the the big thing about this magazine article that stands out to me was this list at the end here that they compiled, I believe, for players. And uh, I love number 2. Don't kill something just for the sake of killing it. The monster you eliminate thoughtlessly may just know the key clue for your quest. So don't be a murder hobo. Like even then it was just like, don't be a murder hobo. Don't just kill things, outright. I just, again, it's hilarious to me. Act quickly, but not recklessly. Help the party
Hmm.
members. And it's funny too, because if we go back to the first page, I'm going to go back to the very first page, and they run down this sequence of play, where like the party's like, oh, I light a torch and go down there's a door and you're attacked by 16 werewolves, and one person's like, oh, I drop my sword and fight, and the other person's like, I run back to get the rest of the group, and they're like, a war gamer might look at this and say, well, the one fellow abandoned his comrade to be slaughtered, his companion to be eaten by a bunch of wolves. But in a role playing game, it makes more sense, X Y. I just love history. My very first degrees were in history, and this is a history of sorts. This is a history of Dungeons and Dragons and the first experiences with OD&D. And we're not talking AD&D here, guys. This is the original little booklets, and that's one thing they do go through is are the are the booklets and whatnot. But I love this. I love this campaign magazine. Now, this magazine, you could go on eBay. I got mine for $5. There are people asking like $50 for it, but if you just keep watching, you can get it for $5. The guy that tipped me off on this magazine, the viewer, thank you very much, sir. He got his for $4, I think. So if you're really interested in this sort of thing, this is now one of the things I want to mention. Jacoy and I are going to put together a Patreon page, and
Because
we're
YouTube sucks.
we're constantly we're constantly sharing stuff like this with you guys. And one of the things I think we're going to start putting out there are documents like what we share with you guys, things that we found that are interesting, adventures that we put together, just an assortment of things, because our bar tab has gotten pretty big, I'm sorry to say. And we gotta do something about this. So we're gonna be putting together a Patreon page, and we'll let you know when we launch that. Of course, to much fanfare, and also if you hit the store tab,
Oh, we got some
store,
really cool shirts. Matt and I, well, mostly Matt, but I helped design.
yes, she did. It's stickers and shirts and hoodies and sweatshirts and all kinds of things, all meant to impress fellow nerds. So in a way, this video is brought to you by us, right? Go to our please go visit our uh please go visit our shops. Watch for our Patreon. We'll let you know when that launches.
Comment,
And
like, subscribe, give
comment,
us
like,
more
share.
tips. We love it when people give us tips to things that they think are interesting.
Awesome new games out there. But
Mm.
yes. But in the meantime, Jacoya,
Come back and have another round on us.
woohoo!